All right, welcome back to the next episode of DMI. Today, our topic is going to be, honestly, probably my favorite topic that we're going to talk about. I really like dragons, and I think that they have a lot of really unique mechanics. Today, I'm going to be joined by somebody a little bit different from our usual.
Yeah, I'm the Johto-O. I'm glad to be back and excited to be talking about more D&D conversations, more D&D topics. Dragons are a really fun one, and they're great enemies.
I think it would almost do the show zero favors to skip out on dragons, especially right after talking about intelligent monsters, because they're literally in the title for the game. It's almost like beholders, who are the poster child for D&D. Like, these monsters are something like you have to cover them, and running them isn't easy, to be honest. And
No.
I don't know about you, but I run them at least once in almost all of my campaigns because there's a dragon for literally every single setting.
Yeah, I finished one of my campaigns that I've been running recently that had 2 new players out of the group, and we had the final boss be a modified dragon, one that I knew could handle being 5v1'd. And not only that, but the entire world was basically built on using this dragon soul to create the entire setting, which was one sort of dungeon I called Bigglesby's Mansion. And anytime they were making stuff, they were using the dragon soul as a power source, so the sort of secondary big bad broke him out, and the entire final fight was those 2 against the party. So dragons are a big threat, and they can be your big bad.
And between, like, especially lair actions and multi-attack and all these other abilities that they have, they really aren't as harmed by the turn economy as other monsters are. Like, for example, if you toss a lich with no horde against a max level party, it's going to die incredibly quickly. The turn economy is a really important part of D&D, and during like our next section when we're talking about more things that are mechanic based rather than theming, I do really want to get into turn economy because it's an important thing to understand. And a big thing is people that power game, they really understand kind of the turn economy and how to take advantage of it. So I think especially for new DMs who are trying to learn, and even veterans who don't experience power gamers very often, it's really important to understand how the turn economy can be broken and destroy your encounters, and how you can accidentally fuck up and TPK your party pretty easily using turn economy. I mean, a horde of CR1 monsters can very easily kill a level 7 party. So, but yeah, again, dragons really overcome this with those lair actions and with their abilities to kind of multi-attack and do multiple things each round. And some dragons are scarier than others, but regardless of your setting, there's almost always a dragon. So like right now, I'm running a campaign where we just started this, but it's a space-based campaign that is focused on Spelljammer, the Spelljammer setting, and I really enjoy it. Even in Spelljammer, there's dragons off of the planes, because there's solar dragons and there's lunar dragons, and you're never going to fight a solar dragon in its lair because it is
A sun, literally.
literally, it's a sun. I don't know many races that can hop on a sun and be fine.
Yeah, now the Spelljammer book that's out, regardless of the quality of it based on the community, there is a little part on how to exist inside of a sun. And so you feasibly, technically could do it. You would just take, I think, 55 damage per turn, or that might even be closer to 500. So you're not going to be killing a solar dragon inside of a sun anytime soon.
And that's a campaign that I'm actually running, is using that book, which I know is not a popular community book, but I'm kind of tweaking it and putting my own little spin on it, which I thought, so far, I've been playing it with my party. We're like 3 sessions in. I don't think it's as bad as everybody made it out to be. I think it has a lot of redeeming qualities, and I liked how they kind of incorporated all of the major races, especially dragons, having these astral dragons, but also you're visiting different planes. So dragons are gonna be, as my favorite monster, something that my party sees a lot of.
Yeah, and the thing with dragons is dragons are they are like a Swiss Army knife in terms of how you can run them. You can have dragons who, sure, just land on the ground and just fight you. But you can also have dragons who are going to be flying around. There are dragons who are going to try and leave in the middle of a combat. There are dragons who might take a few players and try and grab them and then fly off with them. And suddenly, combat is drastically different. And that makes them very dangerous. But similar to last episode, where you're talking about intelligent creatures, dragons are one of the biggest intelligent creatures. And when you're running them as just big mean guy, they can be run that way and be very damage spongy, but they also can be very dangerous because they know how to kill things efficiently. And that's something that, as a DM, if you have that mindset, that makes them quite dangerous, even if it's not the elder dragon.
And I will say that, like, let's talk about this in all honesty. 5e has gutted Dragon's Power. If you are a DM and you want to run one as a final boss, there is no 5e dragons that are named that have a spell list. And it is a major disservice to dragons as a whole, because in older editions, they used to give ancient dragons who are well-known spellcasters and monsters. If you're going to name a dragon, give it a spell list, please. Because Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, I did a review of it. I love that book. It was a phenomenal book. It mentioned in multiple named dragons spells. For one, in specific, it's an ice dragon spell that freezes you in place. It's named after a named ice dragon that we see in Hoard of the Dragon Queen, the pre-made campaign. They did not give that dragon a single spell. It is an ancient named dragon. If you're trying to make them a final boss or like a mid-game boss, give them a spell list, because, like, for example, the one from Rise of the Dragon Queen, they talk about the fact that they're bringing up this named dragon, and that named dragon has articles on it from D&D's 2nd edition where they talk about the fact that it likes to hide and burrow and jump up and use freezing attacks to keep its prey in place, and it has a tremor sense. It is given none of those things. They just give you a base ancient dragon stat block. And that's kind of something that I've seen in a lot of these pre-made campaigns recently, and something I wish Wizards would fix, but unfortunately, they're not gonna, because they want dragons to be something people can fight early, and they're really not something you can fight early unless it's like a dragon wormling.
Yeah, and that's why they have in the monster manual dragons of various ages, and as they get older, they get more dangerous. But that being said, you don't necessarily need to be a low difficulty and not have spells, especially with something as dangerous as a dragon. You can, even if it's a youngling, look at other stat blocks and gauge how magically powerful is this dragon, and you can kind of just take the stat block that has some spells on it and kind of apply it, give that to the dragon. You just want to make sure that when you're altering in this way, that will change the difficulty of the dragon. And you want to make sure that even if you don't use like CR or anything like that, you want to make sure you understand the basic ballpark of how dangerous a dragon, whether it is a youngling that you edit this with, or whether it is an ancient dragon, you know how powerful that dragon will be. And if you've been following along and making sure that your party, you have an overall idea of how powerful your party is, not based on their level, but how efficient and how good their teamwork is, you'll be probably fine because you're already gauging that.
And I would say I definitely agree with you. The slight thing that I disagree with you on is from a lore and a DM and a story perspective. I will not give anything under an adult dragon spells. There's a reason that I do this. For me, I keep it in my head of, yes, these are fantasy creatures, but if you think about it, even with people, When you're really young, those dragons to them are like kids and at most teenagers. They're still learning their own physical strength. They're not going to really have had the time to kind of sit down and buckle down. And dragons are wizards. They're not actually sorcerers, even though they do have innate magic abilities. But they're more closely related to wizards, as is said in the Gold Dragon's lore in the Monster Manual. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because a young dragon isn't going to have taken the time to actually learn magic yet. Whereas an adult dragon, they've gotten out of that angsty teen phase. They kind of know who they are as an identity of a dragon, because they do parallel humans in a way, because they're such an intelligent monster. So to me, it makes sense to wait till they're an adult dragon to start incorporating some of these spells, because they are wizards. They do have to learn their magic, even though they have innate magic.
Or maybe one idea that you could do is maybe a youngling has magic, but that magic may not be like anything above a first level spell, or perhaps anytime they try and cast magic as a side effect, because they haven't honed their abilities, maybe something like a wild magic surge or something more chaotic, more uncontrollable, because they're still learning how to control their magic. That could be an interesting scenario for a party for sure, but maybe one in which you want to more carefully make sure when you're using wild magic that there's nothing that could one hit your dragon youngling, or that one hit TKO's the party. TPK's the party.
I actually really like that idea. What would your thoughts be, and this might be something I test with my party, and they probably won't like this, of just giving it a bunch of sorcery points and forcing it to have like up to second level spells, but it has to cast using metamagic, and giving it relatively weak spells and metamagicking them to be stronger, because sorcerers, one of the ancestries, is the draconic one, and I think it could be really interesting to use metamagic in place of spell slots, so the dragon has to buy its spell slot and then modify this pretty weak spell to make it stronger, and they would get better at that as they get older, so then that's where the more powerful spells and more spell slots would come in. That's kind of what I've got, just from what you said.
And I think that's a pretty good idea. The only concern would be is that you wouldn't want to base your sorcery points based off of how many a level in sorcerers have. You would want to base it off of how many sorcery points you think it would be usable, because it's pretty easy to go through, and get like 2 third level sorcerer spell slots, and then that's it. So you would want to balance it not based off of how many sorcery points like a sorcerer would have at level 7, but maybe kind of you would have to do some testing and give them maybe 10 or 12, especially if you want maybe to have them do more than just add spell slots with that, but maybe also do stuff like heightened spells, powerful spell, twin spell too, depending on how deeply you want to go into it. But it's a cool idea, especially if, let's say, you have an actual sorcerer who is a draconic sorcerer, and in your campaign you want sort of that plot line of how their family has had this draconic magic for a long time. This would fit really well in, because then it would make sense. Hey, I got my magic from dragons. Wow, these dragons have a very similar magic to the type I have.
Well, actually, here's a way that you could like refine this idea a little bit more, is you go really down that route and you give them a sorcery point for every year of age on the dragon, and then you don't give them any spell slots, and then they have to take that very, very high, steep cost from the sorcerer thing of buying the spell slot, and that's a way that it balances it down where they can't cast a ton of spells, and because they're a dragon, they're going to have access to all of the innate meta magics right away, and then you can really get creative as a DM. I really kind of like this idea, and it's something I might like refine and tweak, but the only concern that I have with this is if your party is not one that power games, there is a very, very high chance you blow up your entire party if you are like me, as someone that has basically only played wizards and sorcerers my my playthroughs of D&D, I've basically only played spellcasters, so I understand where there's a lot of strength in spellcasters. So me as an individual, I can see, oh, I could buy this spell, and heighten these and make sure I TPK. So then it would be on you. But then also, if the fight's going poorly, you as a DM can choose to go easier on them and make it look big and flashy, but not hit them for the full amount.
Oh, yeah. And I think also you could kind of, if you're concerned about if this dragon might TPK, well, maybe it's based on the personality. So what if this is you could create a dragon who, if you know that your party's going to fight a dragon, well, maybe this dragon is a little more like, oh, well, if I don't have to fight, I won't. Or if I think they're just going to run away, well, I'm not going to put my all into it. And then that will make your dragon a little more interesting. But maybe if your party is really like, they're going to tempt fate and they're going to really go in and they're going to try and kill it, then he will up his ante as well, just as much as the party is going to up the ante on their side. So perhaps maybe that's something that you kind of look at. The Fizban Treasury book really talks about dragon personalities and how to just quickly roll out a personality based on 3 different quirks, based on a couple of different tables. So that's something that you could go in, instead of rolling on those tables for the personality, you think about what kind of personality would give me a feasible out without feeling like I'm just being nice to a player.
And I will say this is my personal favorite way to build bosses, and especially with Fizbans, I highly recommend this. I actually like monster blocks. They're really fun. They're really thematic. And they're what I post a lot of the content for this channel. I post in the form of monster blocks because it's what people are used to. That being said, when I run monsters, and especially bosses and dragons and things that are big and powerful and scary, I actually use character sheets. I fill out a full character sheet for the monster, especially if they're going to be my big bad in my campaign. At the beginning, I write out the whole thing, because then I have their personality traits, their ideals, everything right in front of me. And I actually think that the character sheet is laid out pretty well. I mean, if we're being honest, and especially for dragons, if you go with this idea of giving them sorcery points and having them buy everything and all the metamagics, I think that would be the way that I would run this, especially if you're building a dragon from Fizbins. Then you grab that, look up a basic dragon that you want it to be of kind, grab its stats, just transfer those right in, and then put all your custom personality traits where they would be on the character sheet. I think that's what I would do.
It's something to consider here is how much time do you want to put into this sheet? This can be a lot of work for somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of time, but this can be a helpful way of really fleshing out. I would say, if you're going to throw like a dragon into just a random dungeon and you don't want to spend a lot of time, I would maybe focus more on just doing a base stat block. If this is a dragon that you really want critical to the plot, I think you want to expand it as much as Wyatt recommends with a whole character sheet. Especially if this is a character who will reoccur or is one that you really want the party to say, I hate this guy and I want to kill him.
Yeah, and this goes back to something I think I've mentioned on this podcast already. I highly recommend having, just for monsters, for NPCs, having a base stat block with no name attached of different classes in your DM binder. That way, when somebody goes, I'm going to kill it, you have a response. Because it happens once per campaign, or do you disagree?
Yeah, about once per campaign.
I can't tell you how many times saying, I want to rob the shopkeep, and I have no stat block prepared, and I go, well, crap. And that's literally where it's at. So it's like the best way to deal with that is to have, like, typically I'll keep 1 to 2 magic casters, 1 to 2 melee casters, at most 5 character sheets, just sitting there with stats and abilities. That way when they go, I'm going to fight the blacksmith, I'm sitting right there with a fighter stat block. And if they go, I'm going to kill the local merchant who does like health potions, I have a wizard stat block. And I think that that's fair if like you're going into a dragon horde, just have a base stat block for a dragon prepared, have a base cobalt, something that they're gonna be controlling, and maybe keep a bandit one on you as well if you're planning on being in a dragon area for a long period of time, because like black dragons don't typically keep as much of a horde, but they do manipulate a lot of humans, and a bandit is a pretty easy way to go, if I'm being honest. And if you have those spare ones in your binder already, you could use your custom human one that you rolled out, and then you get to build a character too, which I enjoy building characters, but I don't want to play half of them that I built.
And the bandit is really good because if you're in like a dungeon for like a black dragon and it's very dangerous and a lot of the gameplay is avoiding traps, avoiding enemies, trying to get the jump on enemies when you have to do a fight, by having a bandit just randomly thrown in there, you're changing up the tempo of the game and you're changing up what the party's doing, because now they're going to be like, who the heck is this guy? Oh my god. And they're going to start role-playing with this bandit, and they're going to try and get information from him and maybe come in with a little extra information or try and improv it out. But that's going to be really interesting, and maybe even that bandit can then give the party more information on the dragon before they even see him.
And there are dragons that you're going to find in places where it doesn't seem like you should find a dragon. In the Underdark, there's deep dragons. There's a area between in the Forgotten Realms between like Bedrock and the Underdark, which is considered like deep ground. That's where purple dragons are found historically in D&D. Now, those aren't something that's been talked about a lot, and they're something that your party should be afraid of. They breathe plasma, to put it in perspective for you, and finding stat blocks for them used to be really challenging, because there is a YouTuber who just does monster stuff and recreating old monsters. Really love his channel. Can't remember it off the top of my head right now. That being said, look up purple dragons, look up orange dragons. It'll be the first YouTube video you find. His stuff's really good. He breaks down Bagman, all kinds of different unique monsters, and I really enjoy his videos. I'll give him a short little shout out. But if you go on his channel, he recreated all of the different dragons. And I think it's interesting because, like, orange dragons are something that I knew about because I'm a fan of dragons and I looked up the old comics. There used to be a color chart for dragons on roughly what they did, what they wanted them to have. And so it explained how to create the areas in between. So, like, an orange dragon is going to be found on a coastal city, and it breathes salt and encrusts your players in salt, which deals damage. And these are and it has a swim speed. And a yellow dragon, something that's going to be found in a desert, and it has a burrow speed. A yellow dragon popping out of the sand is terrifying, but these are those dragons that you don't expect because they're not kept in the handbook anymore. I mean, there was just so much that was left out, even in Fizbins. Like, I expected to find those stat blocks in Fizbins. They're not there. And it's something where I think it's sad. I think it's a missed opportunity. But the old resources do exist, and there are people who convert them to 5e now, including myself. I've converted a couple monsters over, but they're challenging. Like, they're things that you don't expect that you may have to go out of your way to look for, but they're interesting and they're worth that kind of time investment, because once you've watched a YouTube video or found the article, you're going to remember that for a while. And then also, once you've seeked out the information once, it's going to be a lot easier to pull it up a second time.
Yeah, and the YouTuber Puffin Forest, he once said, he just made like this offhand comment about, as a DM, how often do you how often do you like look at the monster manual, and this monster that you're fighting will suddenly realize you haven't seen in the dungeon master the monster manual, so you're like, oh, what the heck is this? And so, especially if you have like other DMs at the table, that comment really resonated with me, because I know if I have other DMs at the table, we're all looking at the same main book, the monster manual for sure. And by kind of going that extra mile and finding either stat blocks or modifying a dragon so it has the salt breath or whatever, or the plasma, something like that, that's going to stick with a player longer than just throwing a red dragon. because that when we think of dragons, we always think red first. So that's kind of the benefit. And this doesn't just apply to dragons, but this applies to any enemy type, whether it's an illithid, beholder, dragon, any of those types, naga.
And it's like red and blue are like the two everyone think about, and then it's like gold and silver, and brass gets forgotten. Like a lot of the other ones get forgotten. Purple dragons, the reason that they actually weren't converted over to 5th edition is because they're horrifying. Because of that plasma breath, because the ability on the plasma breath that you may want to take away. Since they're underground in a dark condition, if they breathe plasma in front of you, your character goes permanently blind.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah, that's something that I would consider cutting if I was going to run that. But it's like, if they're looking at them when they breathe the plasma, they're supposed to go blind. And I would say, because I know a lot of people do this, if you're going to run a campaign off of certain forms of media that a lot of people like to do, like movies and TV shows, the Purple Dragon, I would go back and watch that video or find the article, because it is a great in place for a Night Fury from How to Train Your Dragon. I think it's actually a pretty decent stat block to use for that if you were ever to do the scene of How to Train Your Dragon, which I know I liked that movie, so it's one that a lot of people in our generation are really big fans of.
And something to make like a dragon even more dangerous is, what if the dragon itself, the lair that it found, was that location was beneficial to its breath weapon. So spoilers for the D&D movie, not really. But the dragon in that one has a little bit of a hard time firing its breath, and a lot of the time it's just like the gas just comes out, but nothing, the igniter isn't doing anything. And the party realizes this and then uses that to their benefit. So potentially, what if you had a dragon living in somewhere like the Underdark, which is very magical and a wild place, and it can be very dangerous. Maybe the walls are like seeping with gasoline or something flammable, and so as soon as it lights off, well, it's using that to its benefit, because dragons are an intelligent creature. They will use everything to their advantage, whether it is a physical characteristic that they have or it is the environment itself.
And I will say, I got in an argument with a friend about that movie. Not like an actual like argument, but like one of those scuffles you have with friends. They did that dragon so dirty, and he was like, "No, it's really fitting." No, they did him so dirty. He's just this unintelligent. Like, it's so sad what they did with him, because he's a named dragon who's supposed to be really clever, and he just go munch in the movie, and it makes me really sad.
It's very much Dangerous Dog was the vibe I got. But, and this is the really fun thing about D&D, is that campaign, which is a campaign for all intents and purposes, that campaign, that is what the dungeon master decided. Hey, this dragon, not very smart. This dragon, even though he's named, this is how he does his breath weapon, and hasn't done anything in so long that he can't do it. But maybe in your campaign, your interpretation of that dragon or how the dragons act, well, that's what you modify. As long as your players understand that your story here and how you've modified, as long as they know that you've modified that, and that can be done within just the regular story.
And there are intelligent dragons. There is an unintelligent dragon. I do have to mention these guys because they're not intelligent. They are just monsters. My brain's blanking now. It's the dragon that...
It's fine, there's just more editing.
It's the illithid dragon. It is an unintelligent monster. It is just under the control of an elder brain that is implanted in its back, basically. That being said, it is not a simple monster to fight. And I will mention that this is a dragon that makes parties angry, which is why it's often a forgotten one. If you get hit with its breath weapon and you fail a constitution saving throw, you immediately get infected with a tadpole and start becoming an illithid.
So there's a lot of dangerous dragons out there.
There are a lot of very dangerous dragons out there. And I mean, like, even with Magic starting to creep over into D&D with the settings like Theros and Ravnica being pre-made, which I think Wizards should do more of those, because Magic has a lot of really rich lore, because they used to write full books for Magic with every single set. And so there's a lot of things to tap into now that they're both under Wizards of the Coast. And I think that that's something that I hope they'll expand on. So, like, my YouTube video that came out a couple of days or weeks ago, I'm not exactly sure.
What's the name of the video?
It's converting the elder dinosaurs into D&D. That's the topic of the video. And the elder dinos are something that I very much enjoy because they're from the original plane I was on in Magic. They're kind of this primordial creature from the dimension that they're in, and they are giant dinosaurs that kind of are avatars of the god of the plane. And I think that there's a lot of lore because there's merfolk on there, and their entire bit in Ixalan, the plane, is that they are the explorers of the plane. And then the vampires are kind of the knights and the conquistadors. And then there's the Sun Empire, which built their entire empire around worshiping the god. And then there's 6 unique gods there. And for example, the one god killed another one and took his place as he was hatching from an egg, because the gods hatch from like a capsule-like egg. And that's something I hope they explore, because there's a lot of really deep lore for each plane, but we've only explored 2 planes. That being said, in one of those planes, we actually brought up one of the most iconic dragons in all of Magic. Unfortunately, it's not Nicol Bolas, who's was the big bad guy for a very long time. For 10 years of Magic's history in a 20-year game, he was the big bad. So we didn't go through Nicol Bolas, but we did get Niv Mizzet. Niv Mizzet is a sorcerer who is also a dragon that rules over humans almost benevolently, and he rules over inventors who are building things. But he's a red dragon. But he's not evil, he's lawful good.
And this is a very important part here, is it can be easy for DMs to get caught up in that. We've kind of mentioned this idea already, but just because the book, this is the rules versus creativity, just because the book says all red dragons are evil is not inherently the case. And you can either follow that rule to a T, you can say, we're not using that rule at all, or you can say that that is a rule, and here's a dragon that is an exception to that rule. Because, no person is born inherently evil. So that has to be learned either through nature or through just its experiences in life. But there are dragons who, what if there was a red dragon that was dumped off at an orphanage, the good guy orphanage, and he learns how to be a good guy, and then that is a red dragon that should be evil, but instead is helpful. Or alternatively, the opposite could be true. There are certain dragon colors and types that lean towards good. You can have one be evil. As long as you once you've got an idea, stick to that idea. Don't suddenly just be like, oh, well, this dragon, here's how he's a good guy. And then, oh, this other dragon is good, and I don't have an idea why. As long as you're consistent with that is the key.
And an important thing to remember when deciding whether your dragon's going to be good or evil is knowing where good and evil really comes from in characters, in people, in backstories. It comes from the culture you're raised in, the parents, and at the end of the day, the pantheon that you follow. Chromatic dragons follow Tiamat, who Tiamat's a very different story. Tiamat will almost always be evil unless you're changing base D&D's lore, because Io, the original dragon, in most iterations, split into a good and an evil half, and Io was really the kind of that neutral true person and split into 2 aspects, which are Bahamut and Tiamat. So Tiamat will always be evil, and as long as they're always exposed to Tiamat's kind of pantheon and followers and chromatic dragon parents, they will always be evil. But if a red or a black dragon is picked up by golden dragons who follow Bahamut and are good, they're probably going to turn out at least slightly good. They may not fit in, and if there's bad things in their upbringing, they may switch to being evil, but you don't always have to do it. Just make sure if they're going to be a good chromatic dragon, you have to have a reason why they're good and why they're not following Tiamat.
And maybe this would be an interesting dragon, is having a dragon that follows Tiamat that is a good guy, but he's only a good guy for it's only a means to an end. So, oh, hey, he's going to help out. He's going to be a really good guy. Oh, I've changed a whole bunch. Oh, I can take over the entire nation and have it bend to my will. That's really why I've been helping the party, or I've been helping and acting like I have changed, is because I'm a double crosser. I'm a double agent.
And I would say that that's still an evil character, though, to me. Because for me, I view it as intentions versus actions. That is an evil character that is pretending to be good.
Right. He's still a follower of Tiamat. He's just pretending he isn't for future investments down the line. And then he's like, oh, no, actually, I'm evil. I'm an idiot.
Yeah, and definitely when you're considering that, there's things like, is it Waterdeep that has the staff that protects them from dragons and no dragon can enter Waterdeep?
I think it is, but I'm not 100%.
But it was made by a chromatic dragon, if I remember correctly, to ward off other chromatic dragons that were evil. So it's not inherently something that doesn't happen. That being said, a big part of how dragons act, especially named dragons, the bigger and older the dragon is, there's this thing that is mentioned in Fizban's called True Sight, where they obtain as a dragon the ability to see through other planes and see other iterations of themselves. So they can see every existence of them on every plane, and usually they kind of go a little bit crazy with it, because the more versions of them there are, the less power that they have. So there actually is a dragon in D&D's lore whose name starts with I want to say an I, but I can't remember it right now. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it's mentioned in Fizban's. He sees every iteration of himself and decides to start going dimension hopping to kill every other version of himself to have as much power as possible. And that's scary.
That's Kang the Conqueror.
Is that?
No, that's not his name, but that is a Marvel villain who does the exact same thing.
Yeah. So all dragons have this innate ability too. So also you have to question yourself, are they going to develop that ability? And typically in D&D's lore, only really old dragons who have an large amount of power do that. So keep that in mind when you're running your games. I would say, though, one thing that makes dragons stand out are lairs. Do you have any particular strong feelings about lairs? Because I'm sure you'll enjoy mine.
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to dragons that have lairs, not all of them do, but the ones that do are supposed to be more deadly. These are a little bit more of an investment by the DM, because you have to not only read the stat block, you also have to read the lair actions and figure out when you want to do a lair action. But basically, when you have a dragon in a lair, it's supposed to be more dangerous than a dragon flying around. There's a lesser risk usually with finding a dragon out in the wild than in a lair. Because as an intelligent creature, if the dragon starts seeing, hey, I'm going to lose this fight, the dragon is not going to sunken cost fallacy. The dragon is typically not going to try and win against the party. There's not a lot that the dragon has to gain by killing a party if it costs him a lot of pain and it makes him injured. So in the wild, they're typically going to fly off. In a lair, however, and this depends on the dragon, either personality or color, they're going to more likely defend their hoard, because a lot of dragons have a lot of treasure, have a lot of gold, have a lot of things that they value, and you're in their domain. So with stuff like lair actions, this makes dragons more dangerous because they're not going to run away. They're up against the wall. They're going to give you everything they have because they don't want to die and they don't want you taking their stuff.
So my parties usually refuse to enter dragon lairs for any reason. And there is a reason for that. I love dragons. They're my favorite monster. Unless you have to, you do not want to fight a dragon in a lair with me. There is a 90% chance that at least one person will die. They're going to use every lair action, and climbing down their lair to get to them will be riddled with traps because they've had time to plan. And then you're going to get to the bottom, and you're going to have to fight this dragon and kill it with its lair actions. So good luck. Normal DM things. My traps are particularly bad as well. If you kill it, and it is an evil dragon, it will return as a dragon lich. It will literally stand back up, and you will have to kill a dragon lich after that. Because, I mean, let's be honest. If it's an evil dragon and you just killed it in its hoard and tried to steal its stuff, it is going to resurrect itself from the dead and make you miserable.
You could also potentially, instead of using like a dragon lich, the term is Draco Lich.
It is Draco Lich, yeah.
So you could use the Draco Lich stat block, which is incredibly mean to do to your players after they use everything to kill the evil dragon. But this is one of my favorite enemies, not because I've ever actually run it, but it's the concept and the writing of it that I really like. The Revenant. If an evil dragon sees it's going to lose and it gets more and more mad, well, the concept of the Revenant as an enemy, it's an undead, it's a zombie that comes back to life because it is so angry at whatever happened that it died, whatever the circumstances, it was so angry that it has a year to get revenge before it turns back into nothing. So you could potentially curse the party and have a dragon come back later, but it's a little bit less strong. Or if you still kind of want to do a sort of, you've done 3/4 of the fight by killing this evil dragon, now you've got a weaker Draco Lich with some Revenant capabilities, or something where you kind of make it a little easier once you've gotten to that point. But also that's a choice that I would do because I'm nicer.
See, actually, I view that as meaner.
Really?
Yeah, because how I would run that, if the dragon comes back as a remnant, I like the idea that with remnants, there was a alternate rule put into one of the Dungeon Master handbooks for them, where they constantly know where the people they're trying to get revenge on are. And to me, a much more cruel one is that every time it comes back, it tracks them down and destroys anything and anyone that helped them. So now the party has no friends, no allies, and no towns, and they're a walking curse. And every time that they go into a town, they know that town will die.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that rule. But another neat idea kind of based off of that is, what if you kill the evil dragon, you get the horde, you're good. Oh, the bones fall and crumble and everything. And then maybe it takes some time. Maybe it takes a month, maybe it takes a year, depending on how long you think the in-game time will take. But over time, that's what brings the dragon back, and it becomes a Draco Lich. It doesn't just auto-res, but just is bones. It takes a period of time, and then the party has a period of time where they think everything is good before suddenly they are fighting this Draco Lich again.
And that's actually a good idea, too. I do think one thing you could do that would be kind of fun is also with them, you could have the horde be cursed. I mentioned this because it was an idea I'm actually thinking about using for my campaign that is an astral one. One of my party members wanted to have a gambling addiction, and so whenever a coin touches him, it gets stuck on him until someone breaks the curse and he can become encumbered from it. What if every single coin there can't be spent because they get stuck on you if it's a coin hoard, or in some way curse it? I'm thinking almost like a Pirates of the Caribbean-esque curse where it's only lifted when either you have a high-level cleric break the curse or when all of the gold has been returned to the horde or all of the items.
And that's something a dragon would do.
Absolutely.
Now, here's another idea of an evil thing you could do with a horde that a dragon would do. I believe it's in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. There is a mimic horde. It was a mimic that's trying to pretend to be a hoard of money, a pile of gold, a large pile of gold. I could see a dragon. This is one evil dragon. I could see a dragon getting a mimic, having it be a horde, and then having his horde somewhere else. And if, let's say, the party comes across the mimic horde, and they're like, oh my god, great, we did it. And then the mimic horde is actually what alerts the dragon. Or the horde is actually hidden in some secret compartment further in, but the party would have to search deeper for it. Or something along those lines where they kill the dragon and they're like, we get the horde. It's not the horde. It's now a mimic horde. That might be a little frustrating to players, but that would be very funny. Especially, what if there was some kind of magical item in there that they had needed to get, and later they actually have to return, and now that they're more wizened and they're a much stronger party, maybe then they actually find that dragon horde, and they get into the actual room it is in, or something along those lines.
And I really like the idea of, this is one that I ran. And it wasn't, I've run this in 2 groups, and one group loved this idea, and one group hated this idea. They had to go in and kill a black dragon that was destroying a town. Pretty stock standard. They had to kill the dragon. Well, I don't know how much you know about black dragons, but they have an optional horde where they keep bones and things of people that they've killed as trophies of strong warriors. The entire horde of bones resurrected as skeletons.
That is an evil idea, but man, is that a cool set piece of an idea.
Oh yeah, it was, and again, I ran it with one party and they hated it, and I ran it with another party, and one of my players literally looked up at me and goes, well, yep, fuck us, we get this. and his point and the reason he felt that way is because they're a group that is a little bit more power gamey, and they in that campaign they were murder hoboing, and so he goes and he looked up and he goes, yep, fuck us. And I was like,
this is our comeuppance. This is our, well, we're not going to be surviving this one.
They lived, but also only one of the party of 6 lived. Like, it was a massacre because I ran old skeleton rules for D&D where it steals permanent hit points, and they were gone. They were really gone because they didn't have a cleric either, because they were all playing like the really strong power gamey ones where they were playing like padlocks and things that were broken, and no one multi-classed into cleric because they weren't expecting to have to deal with large hordes of undead, because I told them, well, I'm not going to deal with a lich when they asked me about character creation. They're like, will we see a lich at any point? I was like, no. So they thought they were fine to, well, they asked specifically, are we going to see a necromancer? I said, no. But you saw a black dragon who performs evil magic, so I thought that wasn't necessarily a lie. The horde was cursed, and they kind of agreed on that. But they loved that idea. But my more roleplay heavy group, they understood the roleplay piece, but they hated the encounter, and that's where I would tone it down and have it have a smaller horde, but I feel like that kind of almost kills the vibe, so I wouldn't really do it in that case. It just depends on your party, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. And this is just one of those things where you got to gauge with your players. You know, if you know you've got a really role play heavy group, maybe kind of keep this as a set piece. Maybe don't go the full mile. If you know this is a group that loves to fight and loves to try and make optimal characters, this is great.
Yeah, and it's like having a curse on the horde can be fun. It just, I would say, gauge your curse based off of the party. Because, like, a curse where it's almost Pirates of the Caribbean, they can't taste food, they can't sleep, they're just miserable until every single piece is back, like in Pirates of the Caribbean 1, that could be really fun for a roleplay heavy group. Versus and like the curse where a coin sticks to you and you become encumbered. That could be really fun for a roleplay heavy group. And they're going to realize it pretty quick as they like touch the coin and then they can't get it in the bag. So they're not going to put like 100 on them at once. But then when they go into town and they start touching other money and it starts getting stuck on them and they're like, well, I can't pay for anything either because it's stuck on me. That's something that's like really inconvenient. But then you just kind of have to find a high-level cleric, or you make another stipulation, which you could have the dragon have a note in there or something. Or you could have them meet a cleric and be like, oh, well, you can dispel it this way. And just, like, make it a story piece. And that, I feel like, is going to be better for a roleplay group than, okay, now all of the coins merge together into 4 iron golems. Have fun after they've just killed a dragon.
Yeah. Oh, how cool would it be if suddenly you get the horde and then suddenly like some of the coins start forming like a golem? You know, like just like a coin golem. That would also. This is why dragons are cool.
Dragons are really versatile, and I think that's what makes them fun. And really, it comes down to how vindictive you feel the dragon would be also, because I'm going to be honest, dragons are very arrogant creatures by nature, all of them, regardless of what alignment they have. They don't know humility. There is not a such thing as a humanitarian dragon. They don't exist. So if you guys are going to kill them, they're all going to be really vindictive, whether they're good or evil. So I'm going to be real with you. A gold dragon that you murder, who is leading a town, who is a good guy, is probably going to be really, really mad. And their horde is usually magic books. He's probably going to set up a magic trap that's going to blow you to heaven. Like, and just being honest. Or, like, teleport you to another plane, like the astral plane, where then you'll suffocate.
Yeah. Or look at Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door as an example of dragons who are a little more... They're selfish, but they also... They aren't just solitary. Like, beholders are solitary. Each beholder thinks that they are the best beholder. A dragon is willing to work with other dragons if they see the beneficial goal. So, for instance, in Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, there is a dragon very early on that Mario takes care of using a weakness of it. But then later on, he finds another dragon, and what? This is the brother to the dragon that Mario vanquished earlier in the game. And then you have to deal with that. And that can be really fun, too.
And there's also, like, all of this. There's, like, cosmic dragons, and I know they exist in D&D because I've seen them homebrew at least. I think they were a canon thing at one point, but they're at least in some game this way, where once a dragon hits a certain level of strength, they become one omnipresence, and they understand all things. If you're dealing with dragons like that, they're going to be a horde. They're going to be in a large group. They're going to kill you. You don't want to fight a council of solar dragons.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other way to put it. Like, when you get them all together, dragons are really interesting because they're versatile, But you also kind of have to recognize the traits that aren't going to go away on dragons. Dragons are always arrogant. That is the one thing every dragon shares.
And part of that arrogance, story-wise, lore-wise, is that's their weakness. Society and civilization works together. Dragons think individually. They are inherently flawed creatures, regardless of how many there are, whether they're an endangered species or whether you find them all over the place. They fail to kind of work together. And because they don't work together, that is why they all being the kings that subjugate everybody in the Forgotten Realms and Eberron and in the magic worlds, etc., etc.
And I will also point this out because this is a very important lore piece, and I think it's a big thing to mention, especially to new DMs. Dragons have never and will never want to control everything. They want to control their area, and they are happy with that. There is not a dragon who truly wants to go out of his way to conquer everything. They may lust for power, but they're never going to try to conquer every single thing that exists. And the reason for that is dragons are the original race in D&D. If you read Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, no matter what D&D lore you go with, dragons are from the original world. And in D&D, the worlds have been destroyed multiple times and brought back together. The Illithids held the entire planet at one point. I think they're Ashuras. They also held the whole world at one point. Humans held the whole world at one point. All of these races have held the world at one point during different iterations. The creators of the Naga, which I can't remember their name, but they were a snake people. They controlled the whole world and the whole galaxy at one point.
Really long time ago.
Yeah, a really long time ago. But dragons, which literally are, regardless of which pantheon people follows, other than Ao, are the only creators of the universe. If they wanted to, they already would have. Their gods are still alive. Bahamut is still alive, and he is one of the original entities with Ao. Tiamat, one of the original entities with Ao, and they haven't taken the world, and so that kind of shows that they want to have their little piece of heaven and be left alone.
One of, I think, the coolest things, you can do this with other creatures too, krakens, beholders, big name threats, is when you enter an area, or if they just took over an area relatively recently, this is from both Fizban's and the Monster Manual, is characters that are so powerful magically, dragons and beholders specifically, they will start to affect the area they are in. So a cool idea could be is your party goes to a town and they explore the town and they like the town, but it's time to move on from Hupperduke. When they come back to Hupperduke, maybe they're just passing through, or maybe they come back for some plot reason. Suddenly, the town is covered in a blizzard. And now you know that somewhere in the overall geographic vicinity, I think it's not a white dragon, has taken up residence, and you know this because of the area.
Silver dragons are the same way too. They'll do it too, but they're the good version. So maybe a silver dragon has been hanging out there for a couple of years, and that's over the time frame of years. If your party leaves for a couple of years and you do a flash forward, that's when they would come back and see that. It's not like a right away thing, but what I actually really like is because they're from the original world. If a red dragon homes near a town, maybe the whole area in that plains literally becomes a mountain range. These creatures are so strong, they're literally moving the tectonic plates of where they're at, and they may just be breaking up the land and using magic to do it too.
Yeah, and if you're concerned about the year rule or anything like that, remember rules versus creativity. If you want to create a cool set piece, just stay consistent with it.
Yeah. I would just say I wouldn't do it where the party leaves and they come back and it's a winter wonderland within a night.
Yeah.
That seems a little too quick, but I would even say give it a month. A month the storm could have started and it could have started to pile up, but you wouldn't have things like glaciers yet. Glaciers would
Right.
take time.
Glaciers, and maybe it takes a week after the white dragon has been slain for the natural environment to start returning. Less and less snow over time. The temperature starts getting warmer and warmer. Slowly you're seeing it go from what the dragon's breath weapon is into how that area should normally be.
And before this comment happens, I'm gonna address it before the comment happens. But why? What about wish? If a dragon has a wish and your party comes back to fight them, it can just wish that your party is dead. So you don't want to give a dragon a wish. I'm just gonna be honest. That is something you never want to give dragons access to. It's just, if they're gonna wish for the terrain to be different, they're gonna wish for your party to be dead. That's honestly my belief, because when you're building these encounters, I would say stay under 6 level spells for any like general encounter. Even if it's a boss fight, give them more spell slots. Don't let them cast spells above like probably 8th level. Anything above 8th level just is game ending. And I have personally even played some power gaming characters trying to actually win a fight against a boss with 8th, 9th level spells, if your DM knows what they're doing, is nearly impossible. And I think that that's really important to keep in your mind. That being said, there's a lot you can do. There is a lot that you can do. And anti-magic fields are something fun that dragons could cast that are a little wonky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where it could gut them really well. It could gut the party, but it's also going to cut the dragon. So it's kind of, is your dragon going to take that gamble? Or are they going to just magic themselves out of existence? But it could be fun, because then your party's going to suspect that something's there that's not a beholder or a dragon, because there's no magic. Why would there be a magic boss hiding in an anti-magic? And that's where you can kind of be sneaky to try to hide dragons. Hiding dragons is really, really interesting. And what I like to do when I'm doing that terrain effect that you talked about, Joe, is it slowly spreads from around them as like the epicenter. So it might take time before it hits the town. Your party may trudge through a snowstorm in a mountain range that is normally sunny, and they're like, God, the high elevation snow really sucks today. And then they come back in a month, 2 months, and it's a sheet of ice.
A whole sheet of ice. And this sets up the danger of the dragon early. This also can get your players to start thinking differently. If he can do this all the way out here, what can he do in person? Something really cool that D&D I think could do a little better with is doing things like The Witcher. The Witcher, they have a lot of different monsters, and they're all very dangerous. But if you come prepared and you know what kind of monster you're dealing with, that makes it feasible for a human to kill something horribly monstrous. If the party's already seeing that the terrain around the area that they've already been in apparently not, has already been in and has changed, this might make the party start feeling like, hey, we have got to plan ahead. Let's learn about white dragons. Let's learn about how do we deal with this threat. And that is both you're preparing for a combat, but also that's role play too at the same time. Even though you're not fighting the dragon yet, the preparation, the prep time.
So a thing that I don't actually mention to new DMs very often, because I want them to focus on things that are more fundamental, but I actually will say I'm going to include in this episode anyways for more of our veteran DMs who listen. If your party's prepping for a dragon, keep this in the back of your mind. Your players, depending on how much they're actually role-playing, if the dragon is stealing food from the town, your players may want to poison the food that the dragon is stealing. And that's a really great idea. Don't take that away from that player. Actively reduce the maximum hit points or give it some sort of negative debuff before your players get there. Because if you just tell them no or you don't do a stat change, you're just stifling the game and the creativity. It's something I've played before, And yeah, if they could sit there and just poison it to death, I wouldn't drop more than half of its max hit points or giving it a fairly like mundane effect, like maybe drop its AC by 2 to 5. But that can be huge. Like that's important. So don't punish your players for having good ideas. Let them have their good ideas and let them use them.
This could be a whole episode, honestly, where you balance the difficulty of the fight with the creativity of the player. Because on one hand, you don't want to make it too easy. But if you just say, "Oh yeah, well you did you helped, you did this and it was a creative idea," but because you're like thinking about it still needs to be a difficult fight, that then devalues the emphasis on what the party has done to outsmart the enemy. And so you lose out on that satisfying feeling of getting the upper hand on the dragon. So you want to make sure it's still not a cakewalk, but you want to make sure that they feel like they accomplished something before the fight began by poisoning the food that the dragon was taking, or by forcing it out of its lair or something of that sort. That is a big thing that is hard for dungeon masters to do, but it shows your higher skill as a dungeon master. And overall, I would say game designer.
And I would say that it comes down to the fact of you have control. If the dragon is constantly eating poisoned food from the village, it's eventually going to stop getting food from the village. Or it might move on and build a new lair if it hasn't been there that long. That's on you as a DM to decide how you want to deal with it. But like if you are going to let them poison the dragon, which can be a fun idea, maybe make it lethargic. Take away one attack. Don't take away damage. This is a very important point when you're trying to add some more interesting mechanics. Don't take away damage, because damage is what makes the encounter feel scary. Whereas you could take away AC or health, and you can role play that if he's feeling really sluggish. You see his back beginning to like cripple under the stress, and you can have them come in and him already be kind of like foaming at the mouth, maybe bleeding a little bit, maybe his eyes are bloodshot and he's struggling to see them. And you can even give him disadvantage on his rolls, maybe as an option for what their poison has done to him. But regardless, you really should be planning for things like that, because the dragon is immune to paralysis and all of these other things. But you can still give your players rewards in ways that it's going to make the dragon seem. And disadvantage is one that could be pretty easy, because if they've been poisoning it for a couple days, he reaches to take his swing and he falls under his own weight because he's weakened by the poison. That seems like something that would happen. And it's kind of one of those interactive pieces that I think is important. Do you kind of have any other ideas on like effects that could happen from maybe him being poisoned?
So this is kind of a funnier one, but okay, let's say you poison him. You poison him, he eats the food, he goes into his lair, and you're like, wow, hopefully that solves that crisis. And, well, it won't. But you see the dragon kind of come out of its lair, and then kind of comedically, like almost like you see a cat do it. You see him up chunk all of it. And then you see him like angrily look at the town. You can reduce its hit points. Maybe if, depending on how effective you want the poison to be, reducing the hit points, maybe make every time he tries to hit, it's a -2, -3 or something like that. But you've gotten him out of his lair, and maybe a side effect of the party poisoning him in this manner is that now he's out of the lair, but maybe the party isn't as prepared to fight him now in the moment, but now they have to. And that is still, like, that's a little more on the challenge rather than the reward for outsmarting, but that is an interesting story that has happened because of the party's action.
So here's a story one, and I love that idea. What if, when the dragon first moves in after your players leave the area, the dragon makes a deal with the townspeople of, hey, I won't kill you if you give me my stuff. But it's still harming the townspeople because it's stealing its stuff. And so it thinks it's being benevolent. But then the moment that your players start poisoning it, yes, it weakens it. But now there's a dragon coming for revenge on the town because it views it as as being ungrateful because they're intelligent and they're arrogant. So it's going to view that as ungratefulness for their lives, which it thinks it gave them. And that's something where you can really kind of convert that into a story piece, I feel like.
Or maybe it's something where the dragon is taking funds from the town and they have to spend a certain amount each month to make sure he doesn't destroy the town. But then something that a player could do is be like, well, what if we hide in the wagon? What if we hide and we do this and get in the pile of gold that's going towards the dragon's lair? Or we do some reconning by doing that. Druids are infamous for recon like that. So that opens up more ideas.
Yeah, and I think this is really where I want to cut the video because I feel like we've covered a lot of really good topics and given a lot of interesting topics. If you enjoyed this video, potentially subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do have a Patreon up if you want to support the show, and we do appreciate all of our Patreon supporters. Other than that, I really hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.